President Zelensky, why don't you wear a suit? President Trump says, oh, you dressed up for the occasion. I'm paraphrasing because you can't really hear everything word by word. And President Zelensky responds to President Trump by saying, yes, I did. Responding to the joke, making a joke. The one thing that I wanted to talk about was the misunderstanding between them of the costume. And I think that had so much to do. The costume, meaning costume in America, which is completely different. It's a put on costume. It's a character that you take on. It's nothing to do with costume in Ukrainian, which means just suit. That's all it is. My take on the historical spectacle that happened at the White House between Vice President J.D. Vance, President Volodymyr Zelensky, and President Donald Trump. I don't know much politics to be able to go into that, but when I was watching it, I was trying to stay in the mind of an acting coach. The whole thing for me started when yesterday, President Volodymyr Zelensky arrives at the White House. So you have the character of President Trump waiting for him outside, and the other character, President Zelensky, arrives. President Zelensky gets out of the car. As soon as he gets out of the car, walks up the stairs to meet President Trump. The first thing that President Trump makes fun of, the fact that Zelensky is now wearing a suit. To me, I think everything that people are missing has to do with the suit. It started from the very beginning, from the arrival. President Trump is waiting for him. He says to Zelensky, oh, you've dressed up for the occasion. Something to that effect, to which Zelensky responds, yes, I did. Trying to make a joke, trying to keep it light. The fact that he's not wearing a suit that comes later during the whole spectacle, theatrical, absurd experience at the White House that's never ever happened before. So I just want to tell you, the first thing that went to my mind when I heard President Zelensky respond to the journalist later in the conversation, towards the end of the conversation, when he raises his hand, he wants to ask a question. And of course, President Trump looks at the journalist that happens to be one of the journalists in the Oval Office, lets him ask the question. And the journalist says, why don't you wear a suit? To President Zelensky, do you own a suit? Why don't you wear a suit? This is the White House. You've come here for something that you need for your country. I'm just kind of adding my subtext to what I think the conversation was about. This is the highest of the highest places in America. Why don't you wear a suit? Do you not own a suit? President Zelensky responded by saying, I'm in war, but maybe the next time that I come here, I will wear a costume. A costume. The word costume in Ukrainian is the same word costume in Romanian, which means totally different than what it means in English. In English, when people hear costume, they understand it to be a Halloween costume. They understand it to be the clothing, the outfit that somebody puts on when playing a character. That's in English. That's the definition in English. In Romanian and in Ukrainian, costume means suit. That's all it means. Yes, I will wear a costume, maybe a costume that's going to be even more expensive than yours next time I come, or something to that effect. Zelensky was not trying to be impolite. Costume means suit in Ukrainian as it does in Romanian. It is not the same definition for what costume is in English. So there was already misunderstanding when it came to what started the whole scenario of this White House meeting. I was watching and I said, oh my God, he's not saying what you Americans are understanding Zelensky to say. He's not mocking the fact that he was being asked why he's now wearing a suit in his response to say, I will wear a costume. A costume means a suit. Suit. That's what he said. I will wear a suit. the next time that I come around, maybe even more expensive or less expensive than yours. And then I went because I was really curious to know who this guy in the Oval Office was. Donald Trump, when people were raising their hands to ask their questions, Donald Trump looked at this guy to his left, I believe, to see that he had his hand up to ask a question. So he allowed him to ask the question. That means that Trump knew that the question was something that was going to be from a person, from a journalist on his side, journalist, whatever. I don't know the name of the guy, but then I looked it up and I saw that he was the lover, he's the partner of Marjorie Taylor Greene. So Real America's Voice host Brian Glenn, who is dating the MAGA congresswoman, was part of a group inside the White House as the chaos unfolded. Mr. Zelensky wore a black sweater with a Ukrainian trident, a departure from his usual military fatigues. I will wear a suit. I will wear a costume, referring to a suit, after this war finishes, he says. He must have known when Zelensky arrived at the White House and Donald Trump was waiting for him on the steps. How did he know about that exchange of a kind of a joke between President Trump and President Zelensky? He must have known, because why would you want to have a question that has to do with the same thing that was already talked about between the two presidents? He must have known. He must have known that there was something that was not pleasing to President Trump. So he wanted to get on his good side. Then he decided to ask the question, why don't you wear a suit? And President Zelensky says, I will wear a costume when the war is finished. And then he made some jokes and then he kind of moved on. To go back to where the whole thing started, because you have to remember the whole meeting was like 50 minutes, I think. And for the first 40 minutes, the meeting was going well. There were discussions between President Trump and President Zelensky in front of the press. Everything seemed to go okay. Both of them were moderately without emotion. J.D. Vance, not Vice President J.D. Vance. The Vice President J.D. Vance, who was sitting to the right of President Trump, didn't say anything for the first 40 minutes. Vice President J.D. Vance wanted to no longer be the second character, just sitting around saying nothing. When two presidents meet, the vice president is not part of the whole conversation. So the whole meeting up to now was between the two characters, presidents, Trump and Zelensky. Vice President J.D. Vance was sitting there without any kind of text. He didn't have any lines. And then he wanted to insert himself to become the first character, because I think he is watching for the past month since President Trump took office that he is not the second in line. President Trump, all of the other appearances that he has had so far have been with Elon Musk. So it's almost like Elon Musk is above Vice President J.D. Vance. I think he felt that he was being ignored for the duration of the whole month. And this is the time that he decided that he was going to insert himself as the first character. He comes in and he says, you know, all the other presidents before President Trump, again, trying to be on the side of President Trump, kind of say to Donald Trump, hey, I'm here. It's not just Elon Musk who's around. You forget I'm the vice president. He decided to insert himself into the conversation by saying all of the other presidents outside of President Trump, they've tried to pump their chest to play the strong president with Vladimir Putin. That hasn't worked so far. Has it worked? Because look what happened to you. Look what happened to you. You have a war in your country for the last 3 years. So why not let President Donald Trump and our administration do something different than what has been done? And maybe the situation will change. He wanted to come in. He wanted to say, I'm here. Can you see me, President Trump? I'm here. I'm your vice president. It's not Elon Musk who's the vice president. Talking about how this administration is going to take the strategy of using diplomacy in the negotiations to try to end the war in Ukraine, to try to be diplomatic with Russia, which is okay, great, even though he wasn't supposed to be part of the whole conversation. But okay, let's just say he had to say that. But then President Volodymyr Zelensky trying to bring the reality back to Vice President J.D. Vance by saying, well, it was President Obama, it was President Biden, it was President Trump in 2016, then it was again President Trump now. And Russia has been killing our people for all this time. It's not like the war just began under other administrations, under other presidents. He's been doing it. He's trying to tell Vice President J.D. Vance not to trust President Putin, saying, I've done this with him. I've signed ceasefire. I've signed agreements of exchanging our prisoners. President Putin has never kept his promise. President Zelensky is trying to remind them, trying to make them see the reality of who Putin is and not to trust him. President Zelensky has the question of, what diplomacy are you talking about? He goes on to call the Vice President, J.D. Vance, without the Vice President word. What diplomacy are you talking about, JD? I think that's when the whole world turned upside down. I think that when President Zelensky called Vice President just JD, I think that's when the whole meeting turned. Even though there were bubbles inside of President Trump, inside of President Zelensky from the very beginning, like I said, having to do with you're dressed very elegantly for this occasion, ha ha ha. I tried my best, ha ha ha. Do you see what I'm saying? When President Zelensky calls Vice President J.D. Vance only JD, what kind of diplomacy? That's when everything turned upside down and the world saw something that we have never seen in politics, especially in the Oval Office of the White House in the United States of America. That's when everything kind of breaks loose. What J.D. Vance does, he refers back to Zelensky as Mr. President, as if to say, it's okay that you did not call me Vice President, JD. I'm going to call you Mr. President, Mr. President, Mr. President, Mr. President to Zelensky. With all due respect, I think it's very disrespectful for you to come into the White House and disrespect the American people, disrespect the Oval Office, disrespect, blah, blah, blah. He is triggered by the fact that he was not called Vice President, that he was called JD by Zelensky. That's when everything starts. So then J.D. Vance goes and talks about the fact that he's doing really badly in the war, that Ukrainians are not winning. President Zelensky says to J.D. Vance, how do you know about what's going on in Ukraine? Have you ever been to my country, to Ukraine? Maybe you should come. J.D. Vance loses it again. He's like, yeah, no, I have not, but I've seen stories. I've seen how your people are killed. I've seen how you bring other presidents from other country to welcome in Ukraine as propaganda. So J.D. Vance uses propaganda, the word propaganda, and attributes it to Zelensky rather than attribute it to the propaganda of Putin. Turning everything around, they're making Zelensky as the bad guy and Putin as the good guy. It is unbelievable. President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, they're very insulted by the reality that President Zelensky reminds them of, that Putin is the one that's the aggressor. Putin is the one who invaded Ukraine. Going back to what I was saying about the costume and the suit, you're expecting a guy to put on a suit after being at war for 3 years, having not slept, to be able to take a train for I don't know how many, 15 hours, to then get to the White House. I don't even think that President Zelensky wanted to come to the White House, but I think there's like so much that he needs to do right now to appease and to please the Americans and President Trump and to secure guarantees for the security of his country and for him to come here and to not have something concrete, which he later goes to ask, do we have something concrete when it comes to the security of our country? We will give you the rare minerals. We will do all of that, but we need something concrete. Then President Trump gets upset, offended by that too. Well, I trust Putin. I trust President Putin, even though he didn't keep his promises, as you had just mentioned in front of the press. You called us out on what is truthful. You have facts, but they couldn't say that. He's going to keep his promises this time because he respects me. He doesn't respect all the other presidents. He didn't respect Biden. He doesn't respect Obama, but he respects me. It was all about this petty, personal, triggering. There were moments where I have never seen President Trump get so angry ever. Always has a cover, from his years ago when he was doing the show The Apprentice. He's been so trained how to be in front of the cameras. He knows how to put on the public persona to be liked by everybody. But I have never seen him take his public persona mask off, get so annoyed because of Zelensky giving him and Vice President the facts. I saw the movie that came out that's nominated for an Oscar. The Oscar is coming up now. Sebastian Stan is the actor. He's a Romanian actor. He's been in America for a long time, but he's of origin from Romania. He plays Donald Trump in his younger years during the time that he was becoming an entrepreneur and he had all these aspirations to build. And Sebastian Stan even got an Oscar nomination for his portrayal of Donald Trump. One of the things that we learned, what Donald Trump learned from his teacher, the lawyer that kind of changed the character of Donald Trump in real life, Robert Cohn. One of the things that he kept saying to him, no matter what happens, you do not accept the truth. Never accept responsibility. It makes so much sense that now his cover was blown off by President Zelensky. He couldn't keep up the public persona. President Zelensky is here to fight for his country, for his people. He couldn't let the two other characters insult them and insult his people and country and say absolutely nothing. And I think he did a really great job in this situation, in this scenario. If I'm looking at it from an acting perspective, I don't think that he was offending any of the two characters. I think he held his own. Thank you so much, everybody. Mwah, mwah, mwah.